Welcome to the Thrive Mindset Podcast, where manifesting your dreams isn't magic, it's momentum. I'm your host, Carrie Dale, entrepreneur, author, and manifestation coach, and I'm here to help you stop holding yourself back and start building the life you've been craving. Each week, I'll share real stories, practical tools, and powerful mindset shifts to help you reframe the negative, embrace gratitude, and take aligned action toward your goals. If you're ready to up-level your life, your relationships, your success, then this is your place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Thrive Mindset Podcast. I'm Carrie Dale, your host, and today I have Carl Marsak with me. And he has over 35 years of experience studying and teaching and writing about the Enneagram. And I think we're just so lucky today to have him here with us just to share a little bit of that. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. This is my first podcast, and I'm happy to be doing it with you.
I'm so glad you're here. One of the things I truly believe is that people connect by stories. And so I would love to hear a little bit of your story and how the Enneagram came into your life.
Begin at the beginning.
Yeah.
If I start right where the Enneagram came to my life, because I had some psychological and spiritual background before that, it was in 1987, and I had moved to San Francisco to go to graduate school, the California Institute of Integral Studies. And a friend of mine who was in one of those psychology departments had been studying with A.H. Almas in the Ridwan School, the Diamond Approach. And they had already been studying the Enneagram, even in the early to mid 80s. And that's where I saw my first book. And I saw the symbol for the first time in her apartment, her rental. And I immediately was attracted to the symbol, but I didn't do much study with it for the next few years, partially because I was just starting graduate school and I was in anthropology and I was doing other things. But I circled back around to it in 1983 very strongly. And then I was on my way back to India. I'd already spent the better part of the year in India, 92, 93. And I was looking for something to read. And I went into a Barnes & Noble in Southern California. And I saw Helen Palmer's first book, The Enneagram. And I picked it up, started reading it in the bookstore, and within about 10 or 15 minutes had looked at all 9 types and had immediately tied myself. And I said, oh my God. And I closed the book. I can't deal with this. This is too much. This is too revealing. And I literally put it back on the bookshelf, bought something else, flew back to India, and I spent months and months there studying Tibetan Buddhism. And then I went to Tibet, went overland from Tibet to Nepal. And I had to wait in Nepal for several weeks to renew my visa for India. And I went to a spiritual bookstore in Kathmandu and found an Enneagram book. And I bought it. and I was in a cafe in the middle of Kathmandu, Bodhnath Stupa. And I looked at it again and I typed myself exactly the same time. And it was, again, that mixture of elation and depression that people tend to get when they land on type. This time I had the book. So I kept reading and I went back to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives, where I had a place to live. And then the monsoon hit. So it was like living in a shower. So I went overland to Western Tibet, otherwise known as Ladakh. And of course, the Enneagram book in the chapter about sevens talks about how sevens like to have adventures and be on the move and entertain multiple things at the same time, get scattered and distracted. And I was doing that while I was reading the book. I mean, I was just traveling to all these exotic places. And the end of this piece of it is I ended up in a guest house in Ladakh. And the woman next door to me was a good friend of Helen Palmer, who later became my main teacher. And she was traveling around the world on a working retreat, preparing to teach Enneagram classes. And so she personally mentored me for the next month. in this Wadaki guest house. And that was the first part. The second part is I did eventually go back to California. And then I spent the next 5 or 6 years taking Enneagram workshops from various people. Yeah. And eventually I started teaching in the late 90s.
I find it fascinating that it scared you.
It really, well, you have to realize I'm 65 now. And that was when I was about 32, 33.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, some people call the Enneagram God's wisdom mirror. I really like that term, but it's like God or the universe holds up a mirror to all of who you are, you know, the high side, the positive sides, the low sides, and everything in between. It also holds up a mirror to your behaviors, your psychology, your spirituality, how integrated you really are, how spiritually mature and developed you really are. And depending on the moment and what you're looking at, it can be overwhelming. So a lot of people, you know, sometimes according to type, push it away if they even encountered it in the first place. But eventually, you know, if they're motivated to grow, they do have the courage to look at it. So,
yeah, well, you know, I find it fascinating. So for someone who has heard of the Enneagram, but doesn't really understand it, how do you explain it in a way that really matters in their day-to-day life?
well, you know, I looked at that, and what came to me was it really depends on the person, and it depends on their type. The person, where they are in their life, how evolved they are already, spiritually and psychologically, their type structure plays a big part in it. So I think past a certain point, it's hard to generalize. I think it's important. The Enneagram can speak to very easy, simplistic parts of who we are. And the Enneagram can be very complex as well. It can be very kind of horizontal. It can be very vertical and deep. And as a teacher, somebody, I mean, I've been teaching now 25 years or more. It's important to meet each person where they are. Some people are really ripe and they've already been in therapy. They've been meditating. Who knows what they've been doing, Buddhist practice or Sufi practice. And they're really ripe. And you can go quite deep quite quickly. You can get to the spiritual dimension, which I believe it has almost certainly been first and foremost a system for spiritual development. And the psychology is enfolded within that. And other people, you kind of have to baby them through the process. And if you go too quickly or too deep, you're going to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going to, yeah. And then they'll use pretty much any reason to push it away. Oh, doesn't accord with my religious tradition.
Yeah.
Or, oh, it's just one more new age system. We get the new age excuse a lot. You know, it's like, oh, I tried astrology and it didn't work.
Well, I find it fascinating too. I think that I've noticed some people either really know what they are or they want to be a certain type and they will say things like, I think I'm that, but they're definitely not. And I find it fascinating when that happens, because I think, why would you not just embrace what you are?
I think that's at the beginning of the journey. That's a really important question for everybody. And I also think, by the way, I feel quite strongly that even for Enneagram teachers or people who use it in therapy or counseling, it's important to revisit it and go, you know, am I really a 3? Am I really a 7 or 1 or a 2 or an 8? And in my experience for 35 years, whenever I do that, I always say, yeah, I'm still the same type, but I hope I'm more evolved. I hope I'm fulfilling the promise of my type better than I did 30 or 40 years ago. But to answer your question or to riff on it, depending on the person's individual psyche, they may be what we call a wannabe type, that because of their cultural background or their family background, somebody told them or intimated it would be better to be this kind of person over another kind of person. A lot of women growing up in the 50s and 60s or earlier, the way to be a woman in a traditional family was to be kind of a 2, to be helping and giving and loving all the time, even codependent. You want a codependent wife, right? You want a Stepford wife. You want a Stepford wife if you're a 50s husband. That's part of it. Part of it is imprinting, or what's another word for it? You know, that if we have a parent who's dominant, or who's troubled, who's narcissistic or something, and we're heavily influenced by them, we can kind of take on their way of being as an overlay. Like my dad was a 5. I'm a 7 with an 8 wing. Technically, I'm a social 7 with an 8 wing. So I'm about the most expansive version of an Enneagram type you can get. My dad was a 5. My dad was kind of the dominant figure in the family. He was a big brain box professor. And he was also rather, kind of on the autistic spectrum. And he didn't really get that other people had other ways of being becoming. The best way to be in our family was to be a nerd, a professor, an intellectual. So even though I'm not a 5, I have kind of a 5-y overlay sometimes. Like right now, I'm just, going on a rant and lecturing. So there's cultural influences, familial influences. And let's just face it, a lot of people just don't have much self-awareness.
Yeah.
They don't have that skill, and they also don't know what they're looking for.
That's true. That actually explains a lot. How does knowing your Enneagram type actually change the way that you show up personally and professionally? I mean, you just said exactly what you are. How does it show up for you?
Could you tell me what you mean by showing up?
What I mean by showing up, like how do you see it impacts the way you live day to day, I guess, is another way to say that.
Okay, I'm assuming you mean after I've been using it for 30 years or more.
Yeah, but I mean, even like for me, who I mean, I obviously know what I am. I know that I'm a 3. I know my tendencies, but I'm just curious how, because of knowing and being so clear on what you are, how you see it impact your day to day, I guess is another way to say it.
I'm going to change it a little bit that makes more sense to me, but I
Okay.
touch on, which is how do I alter, either consciously or, it just happens now. It's almost going automatic. How do I show up now in the world differently than I did in my 20s and 30s because of knowledge of the Enneagram?
Yeah.
And so I'm not a 3, but I'm married to one. So I get 3-ness. And my first wife was a 6. And, I know everybody in my family, and they know themselves. So 7s have a type bias, like all the types do. I see the world a lot of the time, not every minute of the day, but a lot of the time through the veil perspective of my type structure. Some of my behaviors are quite wonderful and useful, and some of them are actually spiritual gifts of type, gifts of spirit. I have some great psychological capacities as a 7, but there's a low side to type 7. So one low side is that 7s can be very spontaneous and extemporaneous to the point of being flippant or insensitive to the environment. I've been teaching for over 30 years, and I've definitely had to walk back some off-color jokes that I've told in classes. I tend to do better one-on-one, but if I'm at a party or in a group, a meeting, one of my own classrooms, I have to be careful because out of all the types, I mean, think of Robin Williams, who was a classic 7. It doesn't take much for 7s to just remove their filter. And my father used to say, Carl, think before you speak. And when I was a child or teenager, I literally had no idea what it meant. Who thinks before they speak? You just speak and hope that what comes out makes sense. Another one is to be very careful about making commitments, because unlike 3s or 1s or some other types, 7s can be commitment averse if they seem restrictive or scary. And 7s actually take commitments very seriously because it is a difficult thing. So, before I make a commitment, I really make sure that I can honor the commitment. And if I'm not clear about that, my wife will remind me that I make the commitment, and that when in doubt, follow through. And that builds trust. That builds trust in other good qualities, in community. So those are 2 examples.
I think that's actually very insightful. It leads me.
Most comedians are 7s and 6s. David Letterman, Johnny Carson, not all comedians, but a lot of comedians are 7s and 6s. So learning the difference between appropriate sense of humor and inappropriate sense of humor is huge for 7s.
Okay. That's good too. It leads me into my next thought though, which is, when this community really focuses on thriving and growing and achieving goals. And I'm just curious how a person, once they recognize what their type is, can use that to move them towards their goals or create like more alignment in their life.
Well, that's just a small question.
I know.
We could easily do an entire hour just on each one of the questions.
I know.
Well, first, of course, we haven't talked about how people come to type. That's another question. Another thing is that, yes, it is information. Absolutely. And in this kind of cybernetic age, we're sensitive to information and AI and all of that. But it's more than information, because there's a feedback loop between self-awareness and what's we're being aware of, the information and wisdom. And so we're kind of bootstrapping ourselves up to higher levels of consciousness through I would say three things: self-awareness, the desire to grow, be a better person, and the content of your awareness, which is the information and wisdom, not just of your type, but all of the types. We know you're a 3 apparently, because you divulge yourself. And we know that goal setting, discovering goals and then moving towards goals, prioritizing goals, all of that is kind of bundled like Microsoft software into type 3. We should mention that the Enneagram is holographic. So we all have type 3 inside of us. We all need to have goals. We all need to focus on functioning inwardly and outwardly, which 2s, 3s, and 4s are really about functioning quite a bit. Or doing, we can say doing, but functioning is a good word for it. Mm-hmm. So what's important is that, in my experience, is then each person is still an individual, and that they're functioning within this operating system, we can call it, your type structure, and your Enneagram type. And the exploring goals, finding goals, moving towards goals has some universal aspects to it, which 3s are really the experts at. But it's still based on the person and their type. And types have very different goals. Very different goals. I mean, 8s might want to be strong and dominant. They may not care about outer success in quite the same way that a 3 will be. They certainly don't want success if they don't feel powerful and in control. I mean, 7s want to have a joyful life, a life that has some measure of freedom and fun and play and pleasure and all of that. So a 7 could be, rich and famous, but if they're miserable, they haven't achieved their top 1 or 2 goals. And, that's true all around the Enneagram. So there is type bias. And I don't mean bias in a negative way. It's more like a filter or a perspective on life. So finding your type, however you do it, like completely intuitively or mostly intellectually through reading a book or going to a website, there's different ways people come to type, really is the doorway, the gateway, the jump gate into knowledge of the whole system and different levels of the system. So people who come to the Enneagram and poo-poo it, even if they've studied it for a few weeks or months or a year or two, as a teacher, I can guarantee you, they haven't discovered their own type. Because they're saying, oh, it's irrelevant, or it's like a weak system, you can't really learn anything from it. Well, it's like, well, yeah, but you haven't used the system to find out more of who you are. Because we can apply the Enneagram to society, to groups, and I've taught groups, I've taught work groups. So you can do practical business applications. But at the end of the day, as Carl Jung would tell us, it still comes back to the individual. Mm-hmm. You can process, you can analyze, interpret a group's dynamics endlessly. But if it's filled with a bunch of dysfunctional people, it's not going to go very far. I think, honestly, in a work group, it's good to work on the group and each individual simultaneously. You get the most mileage out of it. I really want to encourage everybody who comes to the Enneagram. It doesn't have to be your first day or week or month that you're working with it. You can read a whole Enneagram book and not come to type. But it is good to know that you can't really access the software and change your own software and hardware if you don't recognize yourself in the symbol.
Is there a way that you recommend people try to work through figuring out what they are?
Well, I think there's worse ways. A worse way is having somebody who sort of kind of knows the Enneagram tell you your type. Mm-hmm. Or kind of like entertain themselves by wondering what types you are and then sharing that free advice with you. Because people are often wrong, and because the way I was trained by Helen Palmer and David Daniels in the narrative tradition is You allow people to find themselves from the inside out. You don't lay your trips on them. Even if you're pretty darn sure, like I'm pretty good at typing people, but part of the ethics of the Enneagram is you don't dump that on somebody without their permission. I don't think that long questionnaires are particularly useful most of the time. People get confused that they have to answer 100 questions. I personally like the Essential Enneagram, that little book by David Daniels, Virginia Price, and it's a very short book. It only costs $9 or $10. And it's got 9 paragraphs that relate to the 9 types. And if you choose the paragraph that's most like you, because every sentence in the paragraph hangs together, right? Because there is an inner cohesiveness and coherence to the type structure, you have like an 80 to 90% chance of getting it right the first time. And that's always the trick, right?
Yeah, well, because we're multifaceted. There's more to us than just one thing. So
yeah, and I think one of the biggest blockages to working with the Enneagram is narcissism. Because narcissism makes you want to see yourself as you would like to be rather than as you actually are, and as you are to other people. And there's different degrees of narcissism. I mean, there's clinical narcissism, there's mild versions. But another way to say it is our ego gets in the way.
This episode of the Thrive Mindset podcast is brought to you by the Scott Lewis Group at John L. Scott Real Estate. Buying or selling a home is more than just a transaction. It's your move. It's your next chapter. And we're here to make sure that your move is remarkable. We know this market inside and out, and we care deeply about helping you find more than just a house. We want you to find the place where your life truly thrives. Whether you're stepping into your first home, upgrading to something new, or starting something fresh, you deserve more than ordinary. With the Scott Lewis Group, it's your move. Let's make it remarkable.
So on the opposite spectrum of getting to your goals, how do people unintentionally hold themselves back from achieving things, or hold themselves back just in general based on their type?
Good question. I'm going to answer that in a second. I want to go back to the goals for one more second.
Okay.
Because the functioning dynamics of that corner of the Enneagram, 2s, 3s, and 4s, and especially 3s, you're on the triangle, 3, 6, and 9 are those key points, are so involved with these things. And because we live in American society, which is very 3-ish, especially on the West Coast here, it's very important to not judge other people's goals because they have different goals. Not everybody wants to maximize or optimize the same areas of life that you do.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
One of the ways there's many ways we hold ourselves back. And actually the Enneagram, as Helen Potter would say at the beginning of the journey, we all have a basic fear according to type. And if we're not aware of it, it really can hold us back. And generally when people are a child in their teens and 20s, maybe until their 30s, this basic fear that's kind of one of the linchpins of your type is not conscious, certainly not for very long. It often takes therapy or something. So if you're choose a type at all, choose any type.
A 3.
So what's the basic fear of a 3?
Failing.
Right? Failure. and the feelings of shame and unworthiness that come up with that. And what's interesting with 3s, this is true for all the types in their own domain, is that the failure may not even be actual. It can be a perceived failure, a fear of failure. It can be a memory of failure. Maybe you have a real or perceived, actual failure as a child or teenager where you felt so terrible, you were mortified. Could have been a failure, I don't know, gymnastics in high school, who knows what. Or you got stood up senior prom, right? For me as a male 7, probably if I got stood up, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. But imagine if you're a female emotional type, 2, 3, or 4. That would be pretty mortifying, especially if other people knew about it.
Yeah.
So 3s often, when they're younger, artificially limit themselves in certain areas of life horizontally, and also sometimes vertically. Like they create their own glass ceiling. Not always. Some 3s just go right to the top. But it's like, let's say they'd had enough success to become, I'm just making this up, Carrie, a middle-level manager at IBM or Microsoft. So they've achieved corporate success. they're given an opportunity to go a little higher, but they're not sure that they might fail and Peter Principle themselves out of the position, right?
Yeah.
Or,
So they'll hold themselves back.
What tends to happen with threes is that they hold themselves back more horizontally, that they like to be really successful in one or two areas of life. There's other areas that they know they're not that good at, and they avoid actualizing themselves because they might fail.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then often in midlife, maybe they get some help around that in therapy or something, like if they've been neglecting certain areas of life.
Yeah.
It's often relationships with threes, feelings, slowing down, going a little deeper emotionally and spiritually. But it could be anything. I mean, for sevens, to be fair to you, sevens are a fear type, right? And sevens often would like to do really well without doing the work. Unlike threes, they don't like work challenges very much when they're younger. It's hard. They have to commit. They have to stay focused. They have to stay grounded. And so that there's fear of commitment. There's fear of possible pain and limitation, which is the basic fear of a seven. So they often, they limit themselves. I look back on my life and I had opportunities to go to private schools or do this or do that. I thought, it's just too much work. I want to have freedom and fun and play and pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to focus on the basic fear.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting because, well, we're all so different. And what you were afraid of is not at all what I'm afraid of. Like commitment is something which I find fascinating because your wife is the same type as I am. And the fact that you both are so almost opposite in that, it leads into, like, does it help you communicate better knowing your types?
I'm going to go to the negative side of that. The downside of two people, whether they're friends, coworkers, or spouses, or parent-child, the Enneagram, is if you have that information and wisdom and you're not your best self or you're having a bad day, you can weaponize the Enneagram against the other person. In other words, you can shame and blame and be judgmental and controlling using the Enneagram, right? Which, everybody who knows the Enneagram has done it multiple times. It's terrible because it's a powerful tool. So we really encourage people to train well. It's one reason why we don't think that just reading books and looking at websites is enough. You actually have to be with real people and real trainings, real classes, or real individual sessions, all of which I do. Yeah. On the positive side, simply knowing that the other person, if they have a different view than you, or they have different values than you, they care about different things, doesn't mean they're stupid, crazy, immature, ignorant, all the things that the average human being, when they're stressed and they don't understand the other person or don't agree with them, we project all that stuff. We dump negative stuff onto other people when they have a right to be a different person. So we've all done that too.
Yeah.
And people who know the Enneagram, that's part of the weaponization where, if Kathy gets on a roll, let's say working, and you don't want to interrupt a three unless you have to when they're working. I mean, that's the worst thing you can do, and then if I make the mistake of doing it and she says, no, I can't talk to you now, or she gets upset. If I just accept it, that's fine. But if I go, oh my God, I'm not like that. Look, that's not good, right? Because I have my own things that stress me out. So there's been a lot of Enneagram books focusing on therapy, emotions, and relationships. And I personally think that's one of the best applications of the Enneagram. I mean, there's even books on parenting in the Enneagram. Yeah. A lot of books about the Enneagram in the workplace. Most of them tend to stay at the psychological or behavioral levels, and they don't really address spirituality, but that's fine. I would challenge all your viewers, next time, there's somebody with a different opinion or view than you, or simply a lot of it is you just don't understand where they're coming from. Like, how could they have that way of being? Just watch where your mind tends to go, right? And then go, they're coming from a different place.
Yeah. Do you think that people get caught up in putting themselves in a box because of their type?
I wouldn't want to overgeneralize that because, if we're talking about somebody, I'm just going to make this up, in their 40s and 50s, they've had a spiritual life for 2 decades. They meditate. Maybe they're a Buddhist meditator. Or they go to church, every weekend, and they're really trying to be a better person. I think they will hold their typing lightly with some compassion. They won't use it as an excuse. Oh, well, I'm a 5 or I'm a 2, which people do all the time. Yeah, and they won't use it to identify even more with personality than they already do. Because one of the goals of the Enneagram, and I brought a couple of quotes from my favorite teacher, Helen Palmer, very short quotes, so I can read them.
Yeah.
I use these in my classes and workshops. The idea that we each possess an essential or spiritual nature that is qualitatively different from our acquired personality, and the Enneagram type is part of your acquired personality, is basic to sacred psychology. So the Enneagram operates at the interface of spirituality, or called spirituality and psychology. Put them together, you get sacred psychology, or psychological dimension of spirituality. And we do believe that there's deeper parts to who we are than our type. And if we focus overly much on the box, as you put it, then all we're doing is we're reifying, we're making even more supposedly real our type structure at the expense of, what some people might call your soul, your essence, or your essential nature. Helen also says the Enneagram is one of the few personality systems that anchors type in spiritual life. The system provides a link between personality types and higher consciousness. And one of my goals for 30 years has been, as the Enneagram has become super popularized all over the world, is not to lose that link to higher consciousness. That I believe the Enneagram originally was probably part of an inner work school or a mystery school, maybe several of them, and was designed to help us discover our box and then get out of the box. And she also says one more thing. Sacred psychology is the art of psycho-spiritual alchemy. It transformed the lead of the psyche into the gold of integration and higher consciousness. So there's an alchemical transmutation or transformational aspect to the symbol. And sometimes that gets lost these days. With all of these different applications, people tend to focus on the psychological dimension more than the spiritual. But past a certain point, you can't really artificially separate them. Anyway, that was a long answer to the question.
No, it was great. When somebody first discovers what their type, what's one small shift that they can make in their life that will improve their life, I guess, based on their type?
Well, the details of that depend on the type that they've discovered, of course.
Okay.
I would say, and I know that Russ Hudson and other people would say, another teacher, practice self-awareness. Practice self-awareness coupled with knowledge of type. So you learn as much as you can about your type. And then where the rubber hits the road, at least at the beginning, is, okay, I know that these things are running the show for me. On a psychological level, I call it your problem set. Where do you go under stress? Well, the Enneagram has a lot to say about that. We probably would need another session for that one. So I was like, oh, I'm doing it again. And if you're lucky, you can drop it on the spot if it's not healthy for you or for somebody else. Usually what happens is people keep doing it for a little while. They go, oh, well, yeah, they get feedback from the environment. Yeah, I need to slow down and listen more. Or like if you're an 8, energy is too big, too much. And other people are experiencing me as abusive, but I'm just running my big energy. Or if you're a 2, the helper, the giver, the server, under stress, they kind of get on the go like a 3, but they focus not so much on work, but on relationships. So it is really true that most people come to the Enneagram more through the psychological dimension at first. And very often through those behaviors that keep us trapped in a box. Or you could call them, the negative side of your type, the difficult side of your type. So you practice observing those. And the reason we start with those is because if we work through those, our spiritual faith is that what I call the goodies, psychological spiritual goodies, they start to show up once we get out of our own way. Right?
I like the idea of practicing it and observing and paying attention to who you are and just noticing. I like that a lot.
The genius of the Enneagram is it's pretty rare in my life that I've been a workaholic like a 3. I mean, there have been a few occasions when I've waited to the last minute and I have important goals like paying my taxes or, finishing master's theses where I look like a 3, like, oh shit, here's my goal. I got to do this.
Mhm.
But for me to pay attention to all of that type structure stuff that 3s run, I don't get a lot of traction out of that. I don't get a lot of mileage
Mhm.
because those things aren't running the show for me.
Yeah.
But if I look at all the stuff that gets bundled into type 7, there actually can be openings of growth.
Yeah.
You know,
Good. So I think we've talked a lot about a lot of different things in regards to the Enneagram, but is there anything as we end today that you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
I like to make sure to mention that I do have a website here, EnneagramOrigin.com, and I have everything on the website is free. So there's a lot of extra information, and I have a resources page with all my favorite books and websites.
I'll make sure I link it.
So here's something I want to say. When we talk about the sacred symbol, and it is a symbol, it's not a diagram, it's actually originally a symbol. And then we look at the points and the numbers that are on the points, which are always in the same place. And we have the names, which change a little bit depending on who's teaching it. But they all refer to traits and behaviors connected to the type or higher spiritual qualities. We often think of them as types, which they are. This is how when energy gets managed into form, it creates types, form, structures that look like these like types. And we think of human personality, but these points are actually archetypal configurations of energy that exist outside the whole notion of human personality. When they're embodied in human beings, they become the types. But we can talk about New York as being very 8-ish and Washington being very 8-ish. And we've already mentioned cities, countries can have recognizable types. Of course, we're generalizing a bit, but France is very 4-ish and Switzerland's very 1-ish and Brazil's very 7-ish. Hawaii is very 9-ish. And places can have, so people who study the Enneagram, we get very sensitive intuitively to energy, high vibration energy as it kind of incarnates onto the physical plane. So when we're typing people ask me, well, how do you type? Well, I type kind of intellectually based on my knowledge of all the traits and behaviors and everything else that goes into somebody's type. But it's a feeling too. It's like, it's intuitive. I'm working with energy, which is another reason why this, I think, was always a sacred system, an esoteric system for growth.
Mhm.
So we don't want to put the Enneagram as a whole in a box either.
Yeah.
We don't want to say, well, the Enneagram is just about human personality typing. It's about way more than that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate all your wisdom and knowledge on this, and I'm sure that folks will get something out of it today.
Well, and you were very humble, but you were our real estate agent helping us find a wonderful house there. And we still love our house and we still appreciate being back in Ashland. Yeah. That's how I met you. And then we have other connections as well. So thank you for all the work that you do in the community.
Thank you.
Just, every one of your clients has an Enneagram type.
Yeah.
Every one of the people selling houses and other agents. And everybody, it's very amazing to go somewhere, look around a room or something larger and go, you know what? Every single person here has a human personality that has a type structure, and they're all just doing their thing and trying to survive and get ahead and be happy.
Mhm.
Be happy. We want people to be happy.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you for being here. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. This was great. Thank you.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Carl. And if you want to know more about the Enneagram, you really should check out his website. He is brilliant when it comes to this stuff, and he knows what he's talking about. And reach out to him. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you about it as well. And as always, remember that I believe and you